morning, grade 11. For today's video, we're going to be talking about some new political parties that arose in the 20s and 30s. Now, most of these parties arose because of the Depression. People were frustrated with the way that the government was handling this economic crisis. They're annoyed with the liberals and the conservatives because, as we learned, both of those leaders and both of those parties were not really handling things that well according to the citizens, right? So people started creating their own parties with very specific goals. But the first newer party that arose happened before the Depression. So 1921 was the founding of the Communist Party. Now, we learned a couple videos ago exactly what communism means, so it should come as no surprise that the philosophy of the Communist Party is that everybody should share in the profits of their labor. Now, what that actually means is people are annoyed that they go to work, they do all this hard work, but they're not actually getting the money that their work produces. Their bosses are getting the money that the work produces, right? The money goes to the company and the bosses get that money, and then some of it gets distributed as a salary or an hourly wage, what have you. And so people are saying, well, okay, I'm the one doing the work. My boss isn't doing the work, he just sits in his office. So if I'm doing the work, then I should reap the benefits of that. So in these economic circumstances, as you can imagine, this idea was widely popular. The party had a lot of support, but the government was not so fond of it because one of the party's more radical policies called for a revolution to overthrow the government and completely reorganize the country according to the ideas of Vladimir Lenin. So if you were a government official living in Canada in the 1920s and people were saying, hey, we're terrible at your job, we're going to overthrow you and kick you out and do things our way, you might be just the teensiest bit unsettled by that. So, 1931, the federal government outlawed the party. So no more Communist Party allowed. And then in the next year, a lot of prominent party leaders actually were arrested. So another thing that the government was doing in 1937, the Quebec government passed what was called the Padlock Law. Now, just because the party was outlawed, that doesn't mean there weren't kind of resistance movements still trying to further these ideas, right? So people would meet in secret and they would produce these communist materials, communist propaganda, but of course the government found out. So they passed the Padlock Law, which allowed the government to close any building, so padlock it, lock it, that was used to produce communist propaganda for a year. The law also allowed them to arrest and detain people who were involved in the production of the communist propaganda and hold them for up to a year without appeal. So eventually though, the federal government decided, you know what, no, that's unconstitutional, we can't be doing that, so the law was repealed in 1967. So another party that you see popping up is the Union Nationale Party. This is a provincial party from Quebec. It's led by a guy named Maurice Duplessis, and they're running on a platform of social and economic change with an extra focus really on French empowerment and activism. So formed in 1935, and then they won in 1936, lost again in 1939, and so again they resurged in 1944, and they were pretty dominant in Quebec politics until the 70s, but in the 70s you have the Parti Québécois forming and absorbing all of that vote, because how many parties can you really have about French empowerment and activism? One of the more dominant political parties of the Depression was called the Social Credit Party. So this is an Alberta-based party, and it's led by a guy named William Aberhart, who also went by Bible Bill. So in case you're wondering what kind of person this is. Now, Bible Bill promised to give every Albertan $25 a month, which sounds incredible. And the thing about this guy is that he's not a career politician. He is a high school principal, and he has his own radio show. And because he has his own radio show, he's able to reach a really large group of voters. So in 1935, because they know who he is, and because he's saying that he's going to give them money, the party wins by a landslide. But now, that sounds great, but now the federal government is going, William, no, you can't just give people money that you don't have. So most of his economic policies were halted by the federal government. And so now Albertans see this as, okay, well, there's this person telling us that he's going to give us money, but the federal government is saying, no, we can't have money. So now Albertans are starting to think the federal government doesn't care about Alberta, doesn't want us to succeed, they're going against our interests. Sound familiar? If you look at the last election, right, with a liberal central government, but in Alberta it's completely conservative, and now you've got this threat of Alberta separating from Canada because they're saying, well, the central government doesn't represent what we want. So these patterns keep emerging and presenting themselves. But regardless of the federal government stopping its policies, Social Credit Party survived the Depression and remained pretty dominant in politics in Alberta and in BC until the 1970s. So another major political party that's popping up is the CCF. So these guys were formed in 1932, and their platform is based on democratic socialism. So I'm not going to go into again what that means because we discussed it in a previous video, but some major components of the CCF's platform are government ownership of essential services, right? Government supplied medical services, and programs to support unemployed and seniors, among some other things. But the difference between the CCF and democratic socialism and between the Communist Party is that, okay, so they want change, they want capitalism reformed, but they want to do it only through democracy and legal means. So none of this revolution overthrowing nonsense, right? They're just saying, okay, we're going to get elected and then we're going to change things because we're the government and that's legal and that's what we do. So they remained pretty popular over time. And in 1961, they changed their name to the New Democratic Party. Oh my goodness, imagine that. They still exist. They are now the NDP.